There is a moment in every person's life when they discover something that changes absolutely everything, and I am telling you right now, the moment I found out what was happening behind closed doors in my community, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for me, not for the people I had trusted my entire life, and not for the quiet, steady world I had believed in since I was a little girl learning to fold her hands in prayer. I wish I could go back. I wish I had never walked down that path that evening. But I did, and what I saw, what I heard, set off a chain of events that nearly destroyed the only life I had ever known. I grew up in a tight-knit Old Order Amish community in rural Pennsylvania, and if you had asked me before all of this happened to describe my life, I would have smiled and told you it was simple, full, and deeply rooted in something I trusted completely. My mother raised me to believe that honesty was not optional, it was the very foundation of who we were as a people. My father used to say that a community built on anything other than truth is a community built on sand. And I carried those words like a lamp through everything I did. We rose early, worked hard, helped our neighbors, respected our elders, and trusted that the people surrounding us were living by the same values we were. That trust was everything to me. It was the air I breathed. My days had a rhythm that I genuinely loved. I would wake before sunrise, tend to the animals, help my mother prepare the morning meal, and then spend my hours weaving, gardening, or helping care for younger children in the community. I was 23 at the time all of this began. Not yet married but respected, I was known as someone dependable, quiet, and careful with words. People trusted me with their children and with their conversations, and I never once took that lightly. My life felt safe. Honestly, it felt blessed. I had no reason to believe that anything beneath the surface of our community was anything other than what it appeared to be. And then one Thursday evening in late summer, I discovered that I was wrong. I had gone to return a quilting basket to the elder Byler family, which meant cutting through the far edge of their property near the old storage barn. It was nearly dusk, and the light was fading in that slow, golden way that makes everything look peaceful even when it isn't. I was only a few feet from the barn when I heard voices urgent, hushed, unmistakably serious. I stopped walking without even deciding to. Something in my body told me to be still before my mind caught up. And through the cracked boards of that old barn wall, I heard two men whose voices I recognized immediately discussing something that made my stomach drop completely. Bishop Lehman, our bishop, the man who had married my parents, who had baptized me, who had stood at every graveside and every celebration I could remember, was speaking in a low but forceful tone about a family in our community. A young family. And what he was saying to the other man, who I recognized as one of the deacons, made it clear that he had been deliberately concealing financial records. Contributions from several families, including money meant for a widow whose husband had passed the previous winter, had been quietly redirected. The bishop was not stealing outright in the way I would later struggle to name it, but he was controlling funds in ways that were never disclosed, never discussed, and never voted on by anyone. He was making decisions that affected vulnerable people and hiding those decisions behind the authority of his position. I stood there barely breathing until they finished and walked out the far side of the barn, and then I pressed myself against the wall and waited until I could no longer hear their footsteps. My hands were shaking, my mind was spinning. I told myself I had misunderstood. I told myself the words I had heard could be explained another way. I spent the entire walk home searching desperately for any other interpretation that would make what I had heard less serious than it felt. But I had heard clearly. I had understood every word. And the more I turned it over in my mind that night, the more it held its shape unchanged, unmistakable, and terrifying. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and prayed for clarity, and the only thing that came to me was more dread, because I realized quickly that knowing this secret was not the same as being free of it. Knowing it meant I had to decide what to do with it. And in a community like mine, where the bishop holds enormous spiritual and social authority, deciding to question him was not a small thing. It was the kind of thing that could unravel everything. Within days, I noticed something shifting. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you might talk yourself out of noticing. The deacon's wife, who had always greeted me warmly at Sunday service, looked past me with a tight smile. A conversation between two women stopped the moment I came close enough to hear it. I told myself I was imagining things. But then a neighbor, an older woman I had known my whole life, pulled me aside after a sewing gathering and said quietly, without looking at me directly, that sometimes in a community like ours, the wisest thing a young woman can do is tend to her own garden and leave other matters to those God has appointed to handle them. She said nothing specific, but the way she said it, the way her eyes avoided mine, told me that my silence was already expected, and that someone already knew I had been near that barn. That was the moment everything became real in a way it had not been before. This was no longer just about what I had discovered. This was about the fact that the wrong people now suspected I knew something, and in a world where community standing meant everything, where being shunned was not just social exclusion, but the loss of every relationship, every belonging, every familiar thing you had ever known, the threat did not need to come with a raised voice. It came with averted eyes and carefully chosen words and the slow, suffocating pressure of being watched. I was in serious danger. Not the kind you see in stories with chases and confrontations, but the kind that wraps around you quietly, the kind that whispers to you in the middle of the night that if you speak, you will lose everything, and if you stay silent, you will lose yourself. And I genuinely did not know which loss I was more afraid of. I went through weeks of emotional exhaustion that I can barely describe even now. I prayed constantly. I second-guessed every conversation I had. I lay awake thinking about the widow, about what had been taken from her quietly and without her knowledge, and then I thought about my own mother, who would be devastated if our family became the center of controversy in the community. I thought about what the bishop had meant to people for decades, about how much genuine good he had also done, and I hated how complicated the truth was. I wanted it to be simple. It never was. My lowest point came on a rainy October night when I sat alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed, and I cried in a way I had not cried since childhood. Not because I was afraid of what would happen, though I was, but because I felt completely, utterly alone with something I had never asked to carry. I had not sought this knowledge. I had not gone looking for anyone's secrets. And yet here I was, responsible for what I knew, unable to unknow it, unable to pretend my way back to the life I had before that Thursday evening in late summer. And it was in that kitchen, in that silence, that something shifted inside me. I thought about what my father had said about communities built on sand. I thought about the widow who had been quietly wronged. I thought about every young family who gave their offerings in faith, trusting that those in authority were handling them with integrity, and I realized that my fear of the consequences of truth was real, but staying silent was not protection. It was participation, and I could not participate in that. It was not who I was. I made the decision carefully and prayerfully. I did not go to the bishop directly. I was wise enough to know that would accomplish nothing. Instead, I went to an older woman in the community whom I trusted deeply, someone with standing and discernment, and I told her quietly and specifically what I had heard. I gave her every detail. I asked for nothing from her except that she carry it with the same seriousness with which I was placing it in her hands. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, and then she said simply, "You did the right thing coming to me." What followed was slow and painful and not at all dramatic in the way stories often are. There were quiet conversations among those with authority and conscience. There were questions asked and records reviewed. The bishop eventually stepped back from his position quietly, in a way that preserved what dignity could be preserved, but also in a way that brought accountability. The widow received what she was owed. And I was not punished for speaking, but I was changed, permanently and irreversibly changed. What I learned through all of this is something I want you to sit with for a moment, because I believe it with everything I have. The truth is rarely painless. Doing the right thing almost never comes without a personal cost. And the most dangerous secrets are not always the ones that threaten your physical safety. They are the ones that test your moral clarity, that pressure you to look away, that ask you to trade your integrity for your comfort. I was not brave in any dramatic way. I was terrified every single day. But I chose honesty over silence, and I chose it knowing what it might cost me, and that choice is the one I will never regret. I am still part of my community, still rising early, still working, still folding my hands in prayer, but I carry myself differently now, not with pride, but with something quieter and stronger than that, with the knowledge that I faced something difficult and did not look away from it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a secret that put you in the impossible position of choosing between honesty and loyalty? Have you ever known a truth that felt too heavy to carry but too important to let go? I genuinely want to know. Leave your story in the comments below because you are not alone in having faced something like this, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, please share it with someone who might need the reminder that truth, even when it costs something, is always worth carrying.